The bunker's machine gun had already killed 11 men in 2 days. I was lying in frozen mud 40 yards out with enough explosives strapped to my back to vaporize a city block, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from the realization that I'd just wired everything backwards. February 1945, outside Dusseldorf, and I'd made a mistake that should have gotten me court-martialed. Instead, it changed how we fought the entire rest of the war. 3 feet of reinforced concrete. That's what separated us from the German machine gun nest that had our entire company pinned down in a frozen wheat field. Artillery couldn't touch it. We'd already tried Bangalore torpedoes, satchel charges, even called in a tank that got disabled before it made it within 200 yards. The bunker just sat there like a concrete tumor on the hillside, and every 6 hours or so the Germans inside would open up with that MG-42, and more of our guys would die. Lieutenant Morrison came to me on the 3rd day. He was 23 years old, looked 50, and had that hollow look in his eyes that told you he was about to order somebody to do something suicidal. "Sullivan," he said, "you worked electrical before the war." "Yes, sir. Wiring buildings in Brooklyn." "Can you blow that bunker?" I looked at the hillside, at the concrete wall with its narrow firing slits, at the frozen ground where Private Kowalski from Chicago had bled out the day before, torn apart trying to rush a satchel charge to the entrance. "Maybe," I said, "but not the way we've been doing it. See, conventional bunker busting in 1945 was simple. You crawled up close as you could, placed shaped charges against the wall, wired them to blow in sequence, and hoped the focused blast would crack the concrete enough to either collapse it or stun the defenders. But 3 feet of reinforced concrete doesn't crack. It just laughs at you. I grew up in Brooklyn, 4th floor of a walk-up on Flatbush Avenue. My old man was an electrician, and from the time I was 12, I was crawling through ceiling spaces running conduit through concrete walls. You learn things doing that. You learn that you don't punch straight through concrete if you can help it. You find the weak point, where 2 pores meet, where there's a stress fracture you can't see. You follow the weakness. "I need all our C2 explosive," I told Morrison. 200 feet of primacord, and everybody stays away from the western approach until I'm done." He didn't ask questions. We'd already lost 19 men to that bunker. Battalion was threatening to pull us back and flatten the entire hill with bombers, which meant leveling the French village behind it. He just nodded. I spent the afternoon studying that bunker through binoculars. The other guys thought I was planning the charge placement. I wasn't. I was watching the ground. There was a drainage pattern on the western side where snowmelt had carved a shallow channel. The earth there would be softer. Not soft, but softer. Maybe I could dig. Just after dark, I started crawling. 100 yards across frozen ground with 60 pounds of explosives on your back teaches you things about yourself. Like how loud your own heartbeat sounds. Like how the smell of your own fear is different from regular sweat. Like how you can count to 47 over and over, because that's the gap between German flare patterns, and if you move during the light, you die. It took me 3 hours to cross that field. 3 hours of pressing my face into dirt that smelled like cordite and blood and frozen earth. 3 hours listening to German voices drift out of the bunker's ventilation shaft, close enough that I could hear them laughing at something. They were kids too, 19, 20 years old, far from home, scared, laughing because if you don't laugh, you scream. When I reached the base of the western wall, I started digging with my entrenching tool. The ground fought me. Frozen soil doesn't dig, it chips. But below the frost line, maybe 18 inches down, it got softer. That drainage channel had done its work. I carved out a shallow depression along the base of the wall, about 10 feet long, 2 feet deep. Then I started placing charges. Standard procedure was to wire shaped charges in series against the wall. Each charge connected to the next in a line, so the detonation would ripple along the surface. Focused, controlled, predictable. But I wasn't placing charges against the wall. I was placing them under it, in that depression I'd carved, and I was working by feel in total darkness because even a shielded flashlight could get me killed. That's when I made the mistake. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When you wire explosives in series, each charge gets part of the electrical current in sequence. Like dominoes falling. 1, 2, 3, boom, boom, boom. When you wire them in parallel, every charge gets the full current at exactly the same instant. It's the difference between tapping a nail with a hammer 4 times and hitting it with 4 hammers simultaneously. I didn't realize I'd wired everything in parallel until I was halfway back across that field, mentally retracing my steps. Then it hit me like a physical blow. I'd just created something that would either fail completely or produce a blast wave that could do anything from nothing at all to collapsing the entire hillside on top of me and everyone within 100 yards. I couldn't go back. Dawn was coming. I could see the first gray light touching the horizon. I crawled the last 50 yards faster than I should have, made it back to our lines, and lay there in the crater with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break something. Morrison was waiting with the detonator box. Behind him, 30 guys who all looked at me like I was already dead. "Ready?" he asked. My mouth was so dry I could barely speak. "Yeah. You don't sound sure?" I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about anything except that men would keep dying if that bunker stayed operational, and sometimes you just have to push the plunger and hope your mistake doesn't kill everyone. I took the detonator, checked the connections one more time, and said a prayer I'd learned as a kid in Sunday school back in Brooklyn. Then I pushed down. For half a second, nothing. Then the ground under the bunker turned liquid. I don't have better words for it. The blast didn't go up or out. It went down and in, like an invisible fist had punched the earth and turned solid concrete into water. The entire western wall of that bunker dropped 6 feet straight down into the crater I'd accidentally created underneath it. The concrete didn't explode. It didn't crack. It just fell, taking the machine gun nest, the firing slits, and 3 tons of reinforced German engineering straight down into the ground like a building in an earthquake. The silence after was worse than the explosion. Then screaming from inside the bunker. German voices, high and panicked, shouting things I didn't understand but didn't need to. Morrison was already moving. "Second squad, advance, go, go, go!" And then we were all running across that frozen field I'd spent 3 hours crawling across, jumping into the crater where the wall had been, pouring through the breach with our M1s up and our hearts in our throats. I was 4th man through. The interior was chaos. The floor had tilted 30 degrees when the western wall collapsed, and everything inside had slid toward the breach. Equipment, ammunition cans, and men. 3 German soldiers pinned under the MG-42 that had torn loose from its mount. 2 more stumbling around dazed, bleeding from their ears, blind and deaf from the concussive wave. 1 kid sitting against the back wall with his hands up, crying. Couldn't have been more than 17. We didn't shoot them. I need you to understand that. We didn't shoot the ones who surrendered. We pulled the ones pinned under the gun free because that's what you do when the shooting stops and you're face to face with another human being who's just as scared and far from home as you are. But one of them had a photograph tucked into his helmet band. I saw it when we were pulling him out. Blonde woman, 2 little kids, maybe 3 and 5 years old, nice clothes, garden in the background, normal life. And all I could think was, what if I'd wired those charges correctly? What if the blast had been shaped and focused like it was supposed to be? This man would be dead right now. Those 2 kids in the photograph would grow up without a father, because I followed the rules. Instead, he was alive because I'd screwed up. We took 7 prisoners from that bunker. Not a single one of our guys died taking it. Morrison put me in for a Bronze Star, which I didn't want, and tried to refuse but got anyway. The technique I'd accidentally invented using parallel-wired charges to create a localized seismic shock under fortified positions got written up in some Corps of Engineers manual. Other combat engineers started using it deliberately. Saved lives all the way to Berlin, I heard later, but here's what they don't put in the manuals. Here's what nobody tells you. Every time somebody congratulated me, every time some officer shook my hand and said I'd done good work, all I could see was that photograph in the German kid's helmet. 2 little blonde children who still had a father because I'd made a mistake. Did I save American lives through brilliant improvisation? Or did I just get lucky that my incompetence didn't kill everyone? The war ended 3 months later. I came home to Brooklyn, went back to wiring buildings, got married, had 3 kids of my own, retired after 40 years, and tried not to think about that bunker. Tried and mostly failed. You don't forget the faces of men you pulled from rubble. You don't forget the sound of grown men crying in a language you don't understand. And you sure as hell don't forget that moment when you realize everything you thought you knew about doing things the right way might be completely wrong. I saw Lieutenant Morrison one more time, at a division reunion in Philadelphia in 1967. He was a corporate lawyer by then, 3 kids, nice house in the suburbs. We had a few drinks and talked about guys we knew. At some point he asked if I'd ever told anyone what really happened with the bunker, about the wiring mistake. "No, sir," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good. Let them think it was genius. God knows we need people to believe we knew what we were doing over there. But we didn't. Not really. We were just kids trying not to die, making it up as we went, and sometimes the mistakes worked out better than the plans. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten." That should have been the end of it. A war story I carried quietly for 33 years. But in 1978, on a Saturday morning in Brooklyn, Someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a 60-year-old man in a nice suit, German accent, nervous smile. "Are you Frank Sullivan?" he asked. "I think you pulled me from a bunker in 1945. His name was Klaus Zimmermann. He'd been 20 years old in that bunker outside Dusseldorf. The machine gunner's assistant, the one with the photograph in his helmet. He'd spent 33 years wondering about the American soldiers who dug him out instead of shooting him. Wondering why. We sat in my kitchen for 4 hours that day. My wife made coffee, then tactfully disappeared. Klaus told me about his life after the war, going home to a destroyed country, finding his wife and children alive by some miracle, working as a machinist for 30 years, raising his kids to believe that people on both sides of wars are just people trying to survive. He showed me recent photographs. Those little blonde kids from the helmet picture were adults now, with children of their own. His daughter was a doctor in Munich, his son an engineer in Frankfurt. 5 grandchildren total. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you shoot me? We were still enemies. The war wasn't over yet. You could have." I didn't have a good answer then. I'm not sure I have one now. "You had your hands up," I said finally. "You weren't fighting anymore. What was I supposed to do?" "Many did," he said quietly. "Many did shoot. I was lucky it was you. But that was the thing. It wasn't luck. It was a mistake. A wiring error that created a seismic collapse instead of a lethal blast wave. If I'd done everything correctly, by the book, Klaus Zimmermann would have died in that bunker. His children would have grown up without a father. His grandchildren wouldn't exist. All because I didn't know what I was doing. Klaus visited 3 more times over the years. We exchanged Christmas cards until he died in 1996. His daughter still writes to me sometimes. She knows I'm the reason her father lived long enough to walk her down the aisle, to hold his grandchildren, to live a full life. But here's what I've never told her. Here's what I've never told anyone until right now. I don't know if I'm a hero or just someone who got lucky with his incompetence. I don't know if saving enemy lives by accident counts as moral courage or just dumb chance. I don't know if the men who died because that bunker stayed operational for 3 extra days would think I did the right thing by wiring those charges wrong. What I do know is this: war is chaos. The manuals and the training and the doctrine, it's all just an attempt to impose order on something that fundamentally resists order. Sometimes following the rules gets people killed. Sometimes breaking them saves lives. And sometimes you don't know which is which until 30 years later, when a German machinist knocks on your door to thank you for a mistake. I'm 89 years old now. Klaus is gone. Morrison is gone. Most of the guys from our company are gone. But those 2 little blonde kids in the photograph, they're still here. And their kids. And their kids' kids. All because one freezing night in 1945, a 20-year-old electrician from Brooklyn wired some explosives backwards in the dark. I spent 70 years wondering if I did the right thing. Wondering if my mistake was actually genius or if I just got lucky. Wondering if I deserved the Bronze Star or a reprimand. I still don't know. But I know Klaus's grandchildren are real. I know that matters. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. To make our mistakes in ways that somehow, against all odds, create more life instead of taking it away. To stumble through the chaos and the darkness and come out the other side with our humanity intact. To be lucky enough that when we wire things backwards by accident, it builds something instead of destroying it. The manual said to wire the charges in series. I wired them in parallel. Nobody thought it would work, but it did. And sometimes that's enough. I'm telling this story now because I'm running out of time to tell it. Because Klaus's daughter asked me to. Because I want people to know that the heroes in the history books, the ones who did brilliant things under fire, sometimes we were just scared kids who made mistakes that happened to work out. That's not cynicism, that's just truth. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. War teaches you that there's no such thing as doing everything right. There's only surviving and trying to help others survive, and hoping that when you look back decades later, you can live with the choices you made. Even the accidental ones. Especially the accidental ones. I still have that Bronze Star in a drawer somewhere. I never wear it. But I have Klaus's Christmas cards in a box in my closet, and I read them sometimes. There's a photograph he sent in 1982, his whole family together at his son's wedding. 3 generations, all smiling, all alive. That photograph means more to me than any medal ever could. Because it's proof that sometimes our worst mistakes become our best accomplishments. That sometimes not knowing what you're doing saves more lives than perfect execution. That sometimes the wrong way is the right way, and you don't find out until someone knocks on your door 33 years later to say thank you. I punched through 3 feet of reinforced concrete by accident. But what I really did was create a crack in my own certainty. A space where I could question whether following the rules is always noble, whether expertise is always superior to improvisation, whether the official way is always the best way. The older I get, the more I realize that life isn't about knowing the right answer. It's about making your best guess in the dark with incomplete information and hoping you don't destroy everything in the process. Sometimes you do. Sometimes men die because you made the wrong call. But sometimes, against all probability, you wire something backwards and it works better than it ever would have if you'd done it right. That's what I learned in a frozen wheat field outside Dusseldorf in February 1945. Not that I was a genius, not that I was a hero. Just that sometimes survival comes down to educated guesses, muscle memory from crawling through Brooklyn's ceiling spaces as a kid, and the willingness to try something different when everything else has failed. The bunker fell because I didn't know what I was doing. Klaus lived because I screwed up. His grandchildren exist because I broke the rules without meaning to. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's more than okay. Maybe that's exactly how life is supposed to work. I don't have any grand wisdom to leave you with. I don't have any profound insights about war or peace or the nature of heroism. All I have is this: do your best. Question the manual when it's getting people killed. Don't be afraid to try something different. And if you accidentally save lives by being incompetent, take the win and try not to overthink it. That's what I've been doing for 79 years. Some days it works better than others. But I'm still here. Klaus's grandchildren are still here. And that 3-foot concrete wall is still at the bottom of a crater in Germany somewhere. Testament to the fact that sometimes the biggest mistakes punch through the impossible. My hands don't shake anymore when I think about it. I'm too old for shaking. But I remember the weight of those explosives, the smell of frozen mud, the sound of German voices laughing before they knew I was there. I remember the moment I realized I'd wired everything wrong. I remember the ground turning to liquid. I remember that photograph in Klaus's helmet. Most of all, I remember that we don't always get to know if we did the right thing. We just do what we think is best with the information and skills we have, and we live with the consequences. If we're lucky, those consequences include grandchildren who wouldn't exist otherwise. If we're really lucky, we live long enough to see them grow up. I was lucky. Klaus was lucky. We were all lucky that night, even though we didn't know it at the time. And maybe that's the real lesson. You can't always tell in the moment which mistakes will save you and which will destroy you. You just have to make the attempt and hope the universe is feeling generous. It was for us. For one night in February 1945, the universe let a Brooklyn electrician wire some explosives backwards, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. The wall fell. The men lived. And 79 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's just chaos and chance. But I choose to believe it means that even in the darkest moments, even when you don't know what you're doing, even when you're sure you've ruined everything, sometimes grace finds a way. Sometimes the mistake becomes the miracle. Sometimes the wrong answer is exactly right. And sometimes that's enough to carry you through the next 79 years. It has been for me. I hope it is for you, too. The thing about memory is it doesn't fade the way people think it does. People who haven't been through something like that, they imagine that time softens everything, that 79 years would turn those nights into something hazy and distant, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. But it doesn't work that way. Some memories stay sharp enough to cut you when you're not paying attention. I can still feel the cold of that February night in my bones. Not metaphorically. I mean, I can actually feel it. Like my body remembers what my mind tries to forget. On winter mornings here in Brooklyn, when the temperature drops below freezing, my fingers start to curl the same way they did when I was stripping those wires in the dark. My wife used to notice it. She'd see my hands start to shake over breakfast, and she'd put her hand over mine and say, "You're back there again, aren't you?" I never had to answer. She knew. There were other guys from that bunker assault. Second squad, the ones who rushed through after the wall collapsed. Most of them are gone now, but for years we'd run into each other at reunions or by chance in the city. We'd nod, maybe share a drink, but we never really talked about it. There's this strange guilt that comes with surviving something that killed others. Not survivor's guilt in the way the therapists talk about it now. Something more specific. The guilt of knowing that your particular mistake, your specific failure to follow protocol, is why you're still breathing. Private First Class. Eddie Kowalski died trying to get a satchel charge to that bunker. He was from Chicago, South Side, had a sister he talked about constantly. She worked in a factory making artillery shells. Eddie thought that was the funniest thing in the world, that his little sister might have made the shells we were firing at Germans while he was trying to blow them up from the ground. He had this high, wheezing laugh that would get going and couldn't stop. You'd tell him the worst joke you'd ever heard, and he'd laugh until he cried. He got cut down 40 feet from the bunker. Machine gun fire at that range doesn't leave much to identify. We found his dog tags in the mud 2 days later. His sister's name was Elizabeth. I remember that because he'd scratched it into the back of one of the tags with a nail, underneath the official stamping, like he wanted to carry her with him. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Eddie died on day 2 of our assault on that bunker. I went out there on day 3. Sometimes I wonder what Eddie would have thought about my wiring mistake. Would he have seen it as justice, that the bunker that killed him got taken without losing anyone else? Or would he have been angry that I succeeded where he failed, and only because I did it wrong? I knew a guy after the war, another vet from a different division, who told me that the worst part about coming home wasn't the nightmares or the sudden sounds that made you dive for cover. It was the grocery stores. He said he'd be standing in line at the A&P with a box of cereal and a quart of milk, and he'd look around at all these people shopping for dinner, complaining about prices, arguing with their kids, living their normal lives, and he'd think, none of you know. None of you know what it costs to keep these shelves full. I understood what he meant. It wasn't anger exactly. It wasn't resentment. It was just this profound sense of distance, like we'd been to a place so far removed from normal life that we could never quite make it all the way back. But the wiring mistake gave me something else to carry, not just the weight of having survived, but the specific knowledge that I'd survived through incompetence, through dumb luck, through a failure to follow instructions that somehow worked out better than if I'd done everything right. You know what's funny? The Army gave me that Bronze Star, and it became part of my service record for heroic achievement in ground combat. That's what the citation said. They described what I did as innovative tactical thinking under extreme duress, and adapting engineering principles to overcome a fortified enemy position. It all sounded so intentional, so carefully planned, like I was some kind of tactical genius who'd sat down with a slide rule and calculated the exact charge placement needed to create a seismic collapse. The truth was, I was a scared kid who'd gotten confused in the dark and mixed up his series and parallel circuits. That's it. That's the whole heroic story. But nobody wanted to hear that version. They wanted the genius version, the innovative tactical thinker version, because that version meant the chaos of war could be controlled with smart thinking and proper training. The truth, that sometimes incompetence saves more lives than competence, that was too unsettling. Morrison understood, I think. That night in Philadelphia at the reunion in '67, after a few drinks, he told me something I'd never forgotten. He said, "You know what the difference is between a good plan and a bad plan in combat? A good plan is one that works. That's it. That's the only difference. We dress it up afterwards with analysis and doctrine and lessons learned. But in the moment, the only thing that matters is whether people live or die. Your plan worked. Don't let anyone tell you different." But here's the thing he didn't say, maybe couldn't say. It wasn't my plan. It was my mistake. And I couldn't shake the feeling that celebrating it, accepting praise for it, was somehow dishonest. Like I was taking credit for something I didn't deserve. Klaus understood this in a way nobody else could. That day in my kitchen in 1978, after we'd talked for hours, after he'd shown me the photographs of his children and grandchildren, after he'd asked me why I didn't shoot him, he said something that I've thought about every day since. He said, "Mr. Sullivan, I spent many years after the war angry at Hitler for starting it, angry at my commanders for putting me in that bunker, angry at myself for being there, angry at the Americans for attacking us, just angry at everything. And then one day, I was watching my daughter play in our garden, and I realized that all that anger was just fear. Fear that it meant nothing, that all that suffering and death was just random chaos with no purpose. But when I think about you making a mistake with those explosives, when I think about how that mistake saved my life and gave me my children and grandchildren, I think maybe there is purpose in the chaos. Maybe not a plan, but purpose. Does that make sense?" I told him it did, even though I wasn't sure. I'm still not sure, but I think about it a lot. The years after Klaus's first visit were strange. I'd spent 33 years carrying this story in silence, and suddenly I had someone who understood it from the other side. We wrote letters back and forth. He'd tell me about his work, his family, his life in Germany. I'd tell him about my job, my kids, Brooklyn, normal things. But underneath all of it was this shared knowledge of that February night, that bunker, that moment when everything could have gone differently. In 1985, Klaus invited me to visit him in Germany. My wife had been after me for years to take a real vacation, somewhere other than the Jersey Shore or my brother's place in Pennsylvania. She knew there was something between Klaus and me that I couldn't explain, some bond that the letters weren't quite enough to maintain. so we went. Klaus picked us up at the airport in Frankfurt. He was 65 then, same as me, but he looked older. The war had aged him in different ways than it aged me. He had this careful way of moving, like he was always aware of where the exits were, always calculating distances and angles. I recognized it because I moved the same way. He took us to his house, introduced us to his wife Greta, who spoke almost no English but made us feel welcome anyway. His daughter came for dinner with her husband and their 2 children. His son arrived later, straight from work, still in his suit and tie. It was exactly the kind of normal family dinner that we'd fought the war for, that all those men had died for. And sitting there, eating Greta's sauerbraten and watching Klaus's grandchildren play, I kept thinking about Eddie Kowalski and his sister Elizabeth, and how Eddie never got to have this. On the second day of our visit, Klaus asked if I wanted to see the bunker, or what was left of it. I'd known the question was coming. It was part of why I'd agreed to the trip. But hearing it still made my stomach clench. "Is it still there?" I asked. "Some of it. The French never rebuilt that section. It's farmland now, but you can still see the crater." We drove out the next morning, just Klaus and me. My wife stayed with Greta, probably sensing that this was something we needed to do alone. The drive took about 40 minutes. Klaus drove in silence, and I watched the German countryside roll past and tried to reconcile it with my memories of frozen mud and artillery fire and screaming. The field looked nothing like I remembered. It was spring, and everything was green and growing. There was wheat planted where our guys had dug their foxholes. The hill where the bunker had been was smaller than I remembered, gentle and ordinary. But when Klaus parked and we walked across the field, I started to feel it. The tightness in my chest. The way my breathing got shallow. My hands started shaking. "It's here," Klaus said, pointing to a depression in the ground about 20 feet across. Grass grew over it now, but you could see the outline. The collapsed western wall. My accidental earthquake frozen in time. I stood there staring at it, and suddenly I was 20 years old again, lying in frozen mud with my heart hammering, trying to remember if I'd connected the red wire to the positive terminal or the negative, feeling the weight of the explosives on my back, smelling the cordite and blood and fear. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. "I was right there," Klaus said, pointing to where the machine gun emplacement would have been. "I was handing ammunition belts to Schmidt, the gunner. We'd been in that bunker for 6 days. We were supposed to hold for 3 more. We had enough ammunition, enough food. We thought we could do it." He paused. Then the ground opened up beneath us, and everything fell. I remember being underwater, except it wasn't water. It was dust and concrete and screaming. I thought I was dead. I thought this is what dying feels like. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. "Don't be. You saved my life. By accident. Does it matter?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "Mr. Sullivan, Frank, I have spent 40 years trying to understand that night. Trying to understand why I lived and Schmidt died. Why the collapse happened where it did. Why you pulled me out instead of shooting me. And I think I've finally figured it out. It doesn't matter why. It only matters what we do with it." We stood there in that field for a long time. 2 old men staring at a hole in the ground that had defined both our lives. Around us birds sang, the wheat rustled in the wind. Somewhere far off, a tractor engine rumbled. Life, going on the way it does, indifferent to the ghosts we carried. "You know what haunts me?" I said finally. "Eddie Kowalski. The kid who died trying to blow this bunker 2 days before I did. He did everything right. He followed the plan. He was brave. And he died. I did everything wrong. I broke the rules. I didn't know what I was doing. And I lived. How is that fair?" Klaus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's not fair. Nothing about war is fair. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to remember the unfairness. Maybe we're supposed to carry that knowledge with us so we never forget what it costs. Continue com o Rotero 23. We walked back to the car slowly. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. Klaus didn't say anything, just let me process whatever I needed to process. When we got to the car, I turned back one more time to look at that field, that crater, that piece of ground that connected our 2 lives across decades and languages and everything that should have kept us apart. "There were 7 of you," I said. 7 prisoners we took from that bunker. Do you know what happened to the others?" Klaus leaned against the car. "Schmidt, the gunner, he died in the collapse. His neck broke when the gun mount fell on him. The other 5, I kept in touch with some of them for a while after the war. Werner moved to Argentina in 1950. I never heard from him again. Hauptmann, our sergeant. He died in 1962. Heart attack. He was only 43. The war did things to his heart," the doctor said. "The other 3, I lost track of. People scattered after the war. Everyone was trying to forget, to start over. We didn't want reminders. But you came to find me. Because I couldn't forget. I tried. For 33 years I tried. But every time I looked at my children, every birthday, every Christmas, I thought about the American soldiers who could have killed me and didn't. I needed to know why. I needed to say thank you, even if you didn't want to hear it. On the drive back to Klaus's house, he told me more about the war from his side. He'd been conscripted in 1943, just turned 19. They gave him 6 weeks of training and sent him west. He'd never wanted to be a soldier. He'd wanted to be a teacher, maybe teach mathematics or science. But there was no choice. You served or you were shot as a deserter, and your family paid the price too. People think we were all believers, he said. All fanatics who wanted to conquer the world. But most of us were just scared boys who wanted to go home. We didn't talk about politics in that bunker. We talked about food, about our families, about what we would do after the war, if there was an after. Schmidt had a girlfriend in Hamburg. He was going to marry her, open a bicycle shop. That's what he talked about. Bicycles. It's strange how the enemy becomes human when you actually listen to them. For 40 years, that bunker had been a concrete box full of Germans who were trying to kill us. Now it was 7 boys far from home, talking about bicycles and girlfriends and mathematics, trying to survive something they hadn't chosen. When we got back to Klaus's house, my wife took one look at my face and knew where we'd been. She didn't ask questions, just squeezed my hand. That night at dinner, Klaus's son asked me about the war. Not the bunker specifically, just the war in general. What it was like. What I did. The normal questions people ask veterans. I gave him the normal answers. It was hard. We did what we had to do. I was lucky to make it home. The sanitized version that doesn't give anyone nightmares. But his daughter, Klaus's daughter, the doctor, she was watching me carefully. After dinner, when we were having coffee in the living room, she sat down next to me. "My father told me what you did," she said. Her English was much better than her mother's. "About the bunker, about the mistake that saved his life." "It was just luck," I said. "Maybe. But I exist because of that luck. My children exist because of that luck. How do I thank someone for that? What words are there?" I didn't have an answer. There aren't words for some things. She seemed to understand that because she just nodded and said, "My father carries guilt too, you know. For surviving when others didn't. For being on the wrong side. For what Germany did. He doesn't talk about it, but I see it. I think maybe you understand that better than most people." She was right. I did understand. Klaus and I were carrying different versions of the same weight, different sides of the same coin. Both of us saved by accident. Both of us haunted by it. Both of us trying to figure out how to live with the knowledge that we got something we didn't deserve, while others lost everything. We stayed in Germany for 2 weeks. Klaus took us to Berlin, to Munich, to the Rhine Valley. Normal tourist things. But everywhere we went, I saw the gaps. The buildings that had been rebuilt. The memorials. The spaces where things used to be. Germany was still putting itself back together 40 years later, still carrying the weight of what had happened. On our last night, Klaus and I sat up late drinking whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. His wife and my wife had gone to bed. It was just us, 2 old men, killing a bottle of expensive scotch, and finally saying the things we hadn't been able to say in letters. "Do you think we're better for having survived?" Klaus asked. "Or are we just luckier?" "I don't know. Most days I think we're just luckier. Some days I think we survived because we had something left to do, some purpose we hadn't fulfilled yet. But that might just be ego talking, trying to make it mean something when maybe it doesn't mean anything at all." Klaus poured another finger of whiskey into each of our glasses. "I think it means something. Not in a grand cosmic sense, maybe, but in a small human sense. You made a mistake that saved my life. I went home and had children who had children. Those children will have children. That's meaning, that's purpose. It might not be the purpose anyone planned, but it's something. Eddie Kowalski's sister never had children," I said. "She never got married. I looked her up once, years ago. She became a librarian in Chicago, died in 1989, alone, because her brother died trying to blow up a bunker that I blew up 2 days later by doing it wrong. And you carry that. Every day." Klaus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You want to know something strange? Sometimes I'm angry at you, not for saving me, for making it impossible to hate you. It would be easier if the Americans who captured me had been monsters, if you'd been cruel or callous. But you weren't. You were just boys like us, scared like us, trying to survive like us. And that makes everything so much more complicated. Ha! If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I understood exactly what he meant. It would have been easier if the Germans in that bunker had been the monsters we'd been taught they were. If Klaus had been a fanatic who believed all the evil things we'd heard about. But he wasn't. He was just a kid who wanted to teach mathematics and go home to his girlfriend. And that made the whole thing impossibly complicated. We finished the bottle that night, talked until sunrise, about the war, about our lives after, about our families, about getting old, about carrying weight you can't put down. When the sun came up over Klaus's garden, we were both exhausted and a little drunk and somehow lighter than we'd been. My wife and I flew home 2 days later. On the plane, somewhere over the Atlantic, she asked me if I'd gotten what I needed from the trip. I thought about it for a while. I don't know, I said finally. But I think I understand it better now. Not why it happened, but what it means that it did. And what does it mean? That mistakes and miracles might be the same thing. That we don't get to choose what we carry, only how we carry it. That sometimes the people we should hate are the people who understand us best. She squeezed my hand. That sounds like something Klaus said. Maybe. Or maybe it's something I've been trying to figure out for 40 years, and he just helped me see it. After that trip, Klaus and I wrote more often. Our letters got longer, more personal, less careful. We talked about things we couldn't talk about with anyone else. The nightmares that still came, the sounds that still made us flinch, the way certain smells could throw us back decades in an instant. We talked about our children and grandchildren, about what we hoped they would remember and what we hoped they would forget. Klaus died in 1996. His daughter called to tell me he'd had a stroke, quick and painless, she said. He was 73. We'd been writing to each other for 18 years by then. His last letter to me had arrived 3 days before he died. I still have it. It's in that box with all his other letters and the photographs. In that last letter, he wrote something I've read 100 times since. He wrote, "Frank, I think I finally understand why I survived that night. Not because I deserved to, not because God had a plan, but because you made a mistake at exactly the right time in exactly the right way. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for. That when we make our inevitable mistakes, they happen to save something instead of destroy it. You gave me 51 years I shouldn't have had. You gave the world my children and grandchildren. That's not nothing. That's everything. Don't forget that." I went to his funeral, flew back to Germany with my wife and my oldest son, who wanted to meet the man I'd talked about for so many years. The funeral was small, just family and a few old friends. His daughter asked me to say a few words, but I couldn't. I stood there in front of 30 people I barely knew and opened my mouth and nothing came out. All I could think about was that frozen February night, that wiring mistake, that moment when I realized I'd done everything wrong and it was too late to fix it. Klaus's son saved me. He stood up and said, "My father told me that Frank Sullivan saved his life in the war." But that's not quite true. What my father said was that Frank Sullivan made a mistake that saved his life. And my father thought that was more important, because it meant that even our errors can create good things. Even our failures can build futures. My father lived his whole life believing that, and he wanted everyone to know it. After the funeral, Klaus's daughter gave me something. It was the photograph, the one from his helmet, the blonde woman and 2 little kids. "My mother and me," she said. "My brother, 1944. My father carried this all through the war. He wanted you to have it." I tried to refuse. It seemed too personal, too important. But she insisted. "You're the reason we exist," she said. "This belongs with you." I brought it home, put it in the box with the letters, and sometimes, on bad nights when the memories get too heavy, I take it out and look at those 2 little blonde kids who became a doctor and an engineer, who had children of their own, who exist because a Brooklyn electrician wired some explosives backwards in the dark. The years kept going. My kids grew up. I became a grandfather, then a great-grandfather. My wife died in 2016, cancer, and for a while I thought about joining her. Not in a suicidal way, just in that tired way old people get when everyone they love starts disappearing. But then Klaus's daughter started calling me once a month, just to check in, and I realized I had a responsibility to stay around. Someone had to remember. Someone had to tell the story. That's part of why I'm telling it now, because I'm 89 years old and I don't have many more chances. Because Klaus's daughter asked me to. Because Eddie Kowalski's sister died alone, and nobody remembers her anymore except me. Because the truth about war isn't what they put in the history books or the movies. It's messier than that, more human than that, more accidental than that. The truth is that we were all just kids who didn't know what we were doing, making it up as we went along, and sometimes we got lucky. Sometimes the mistakes worked out. Sometimes the incompetence saved lives. And sometimes, 60 years later, you realize that the worst moment of your life, the moment you were most certain you'd failed, was actually the moment you did the most good. I think about that bunker all the time now. More than I used to. Maybe because I'm running out of time to think about it. Maybe because I finally understand what it meant. The concrete and steel and frozen mud have all faded. What remains is the knowledge that 7 German boys lived because I didn't know how to wire explosives properly. That Klaus went home to his blonde wife and his 2 little kids. That those kids grew up and had kids of their own. That somewhere in Munich right now, there's a great-great-grandchild of Klaus Zimmermann who exists because a 20-year-old electrician from Brooklyn got confused in the dark. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The Bronze Star sits in my drawer. I never framed it, never displayed it, never told people about it. But Klaus's photograph sits on my desk where I can see it every day. Because that's the real medal. That's the real proof that I did something that mattered. Not the official commendation for innovative tactical thinking, but the accidental preservation of a family, the unintentional creation of futures. Morrison was right that night in Philadelphia. The difference between a good plan and a bad plan is whether it works, but he was also wrong. Because sometimes it's not about good plans or bad plans, sometimes it's about mistakes that happen to save more than they destroy, and maybe that's okay, maybe that's better than okay. Maybe that's the only way any of us survive this chaotic, unpredictable, impossible world. By making our mistakes in the right direction, by failing forward instead of backward, by getting confused in the dark and accidentally doing something right. I'm not a hero. I want to be clear about that. Heroes know what they're doing. Heroes make conscious choices to sacrifice or save or risk. I was just a scared kid who couldn't remember which wire went where, who was too stubborn or too stupid to admit he didn't know what he was doing, who pushed a plunger and hoped for the best. That's not heroism. That's just survival. But maybe survival is enough. Maybe just making it through to the other side, helping a few people along the way, creating more life than you take, maybe that's all any of us can really aim for. The rest is just luck and timing and mistakes that happen to work out. I wake up some mornings and my hands are shaking. Not from fear anymore, just from age. From 89 years of living with the weight of that February night. From carrying Eddie Kowalski and Klaus Zimmermann and Schmidt the machine gunner and all the other ghosts that won't let go. Some mornings the weight feels impossible, like I can't carry it another day. But then I look at that photograph on my desk at those 2 little blonde kids who became parents and great-grandparents, and I think, okay, one more day. I can carry it one more day.